various hospital records, sir, you're aware that on January 24th of 2023, she initially was transported to South Shore Hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell the jurors what's treatment she received at the South Shore Hospital briefly?
So she arrived with a GCS of 10, meaning she was not really very responsive.
Let me interrupt you just because what did you say, a G6?
GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale.
Okay, slow down. Because I don't understand. What is a GCS?
It's a Glasgow Coma Scale. It's a series of things that we look at to determine how responsive somebody is, whether
it's tachycardic and hypotensive?
Yes.
What did that mean?
So it means that her heart rate was above 100, and hypotensive means that her blood pressure was below what is considered normal. And
South Shore Hospital, were they able to stabilize her?
It sounds like they were able to stabilize her by placing a breathing tube in her neck, in her throat, to help with her breathing, and then they basically proceeded to obtain a bunch of imaging, started her on medications to sedate her and artificially raise her blood pressure. They started working on rewarming her, and then in conjunction with the trauma team there, they made the decision that she would be better served at a hospital with a higher level of care.
Okay. And
which would typically mean kind of scrapes on the surface of the skin, nothing that actually gets through the full thickness of the skin. And then she also had full thickness lacerations, meaning that she made it all the way through the skin into the subcutaneous tissue, the fatty tissue. And then you would need to describe it further if any additional structures were injured, which in her case they were not.
Now, in your experience for a number of years in the emergency room, have you had occasion to treat people that have tried to commit suicide or successfully committed suicide by cutting their throat?
Multiple times.
Before this testimony even gets underway, pay close attention to what the jury is about to hear, because this is not simply a discussion about one isolated injury. The doctor is being asked to walk the court through a chain of medical evidence, from the victim's initial condition at South Shore Hospital, to emergency treatment, to the transfer to a higher-level trauma center, and ultimately to the serious complications that followed. We're talking about a Glasgow Coma Scale score of 10, severe hypothermia, dangerously low blood pressure, an elevated heart rate, multiple lacerations, spinal fractures, internal bleeding, and a cardiac arrest that required resuscitation. Those details matter because the jury has to understand not only what injuries existed, but how those injuries fit together medically. And there is another critical issue waiting underneath this testimony. What caused these injuries, and what can a physician actually conclude from them? Listen closely, because the attorneys are going to push this medical expert towards some very important conclusions, but notice that the judge will also step in when a question crosses a legal boundary. That distinction between medical evidence and speculation could become extremely important. So as you listen, ask yourself, does the medical evidence tell one clear story? Or are there unanswered questions that the jury still needs to consider?
In the course of your training and experience, sir, do you work full-time in a particular field of medicine?
Just emergency medicine. So basically we see any and all comers, anything from ankle sprains to traumas.
Okay. Did I ask you to review some documents regarding this particular case involving Lindsay Clancy?
You did. You asked me to review the...
Jury, what you reviewed?
Oh, sorry. You asked me to review the photos from the crime scene, and then the emergency medical records from South Shore Hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and then the records from her hospital stay at Brigham and Women's Hospital.
So in reviewing all of those various hospital records, sir, you're aware that on January 24th of 2023, she initially was transported to South Shore Hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell the jurors what's treatment she received at the South Shore Hospital briefly?
So she arrived with a GCS of 10, meaning she was not really very responsive.
Let me interrupt you just because what did you say, a G6?
GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale.
Okay, slow down. Because I don't understand. What is a GCS?
It's a Glasgow Coma Scale. It's a series of things that we look at to determine how responsive somebody is, whether their eyes are opening spontaneously, whether they're able to speak on their own, and whether you're able to understand what they're saying, and then how much, if at all, they're moving, whether they're moving spontaneously, whether they can follow commands, that kind of thing.
Okay. So the Glasgow Coma Scale GCS of 10, what does that tell you as an emergency room doctor?
Tells us that she was not very responsive on arrival. It sounds like she was not speaking intelligibly, and the doctors at South Shore Hospital were concerned about her ability to maintain her own airway and made the decision to intubate her, which means putting a breathing tube down her throat into her lungs and placing her on a ventilator and sedating her.
Was she also, what would be, I guess, referred to as hypothermic?
She was.
What does that mean?
Means that her body temperature was below what's considered normal. So in her case, her core body temperature was, I believe, 82.1 degrees, which would put her into severe hypothermia.
And did you note that she was tachycardic and hypotensive?
Yes.
What did that mean?
So it means that her heart rate was above 100, and hypotensive means that her blood pressure was below what is considered normal.
And South Shore Hospital, were they able to stabilize her?
It sounds like they were able to stabilize her by placing a breathing tube in her neck, in her throat, to help with her breathing, and then they basically proceeded to obtain a bunch of imaging, started her on medications to sedate her and artificially raise her blood pressure. They started working on rewarming her, and then in conjunction with the trauma team there, they made the decision that she would be better served at a hospital with a higher level of care.
Okay.
Now the severity of the situation is becoming much clearer. The doctor has described a patient arriving with a Glasgow Coma Scale score of 10, severe hypothermia at approximately 82.1 degrees, low blood pressure, an elevated heart rate, and an inability to reliably protect her airway. In practical terms, the medical team wasn't dealing with a minor injury that could simply be treated and released. They had to secure her airway, provide mechanical ventilation, use medication to support her blood pressure, begin rewarming, obtain imaging, and ultimately arrange transfer to a facility capable of providing a higher level of trauma care. That sequence is important because it shows how emergency physicians evaluate the overall condition of a critically injured patient. The testimony is also setting up the next major issue, the actual injuries themselves. And there are going to be several different categories: superficial wounds, deeper wounds, wrist injuries, neck injuries, and eventually serious spinal trauma. Which of those details do you think will matter most to the jury when they evaluate what
Level
happened?
of care.
Okay. And can you tell us what the injuries were that she presented herself with to the South Shore Hospital?
So there were multiple injuries. She had lacerations to bilateral wrists.
When you say lateral, what does that mean?
Bilateral, both sides. So she had a laceration both to her left wrist and to her right wrist, and then multiple superficial lacerations as well. And then she also had multiple superficial lacerations to both sides of her neck, the front of her neck, and 2 deeper lacerations to the sides of her neck.
So when you say superficial lacerations and then deeper lacerations, do you recall, what's the standard? What do you look for in something like that?
So it's tough. Everybody will describe them a little bit differently. In her case, I would describe multiple superficial lacerations, which would typically mean kind of scrapes on the surface of the skin, nothing that actually gets through the full thickness of the skin. And then she also had full thickness lacerations, meaning that she made it all the way through the skin into the subcutaneous tissue, the fatty tissue. And then you would need to describe it further if any additional structures were injured, which in her case they were not.
Now, in your experience for a number of years in the emergency room, have you had occasion to treat people that have tried to commit suicide or successfully committed suicide by cutting their throat?
Multiple times.
Multiple times. And can you tell us, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, sir, as to whether or not this injury or these injuries that you observed were consistent with what you've seen in other suicide attempts?
Sustained.
Well, can you tell us, did that look like an effort to pretend or fake a suicide?
Sustained.
Well, when you looked at the injuries, did you make a determination that they appeared to have some impact on the human body of Ms. Clancy?
Yes.
What was that?
They were consistent with self-injurious behavior. The intent, I can't gauge, but...
Anything further?
Okay.
question.
Yep, thank you. How about the wrist? What did you observe about the wrist injuries, sir?
So she had 2 full-thickness lacerations, one on the left, one on the right.
What does that mean?
Means that she made it all the way through the epidermis and the dermis, which is what makes up the skin in the wrist, and into the fatty tissue, which is the next layer.
Okay. Are you familiar in your experience, sir, with hesitation wounds in a suicide attempt?
Yes, to some extent.
What does that mean?
Means typically that they're more kind of subtle, weaker attempts to hurt yourself, not necessarily anything that's going to be deep to the structures of the skin, but more just scrapes along the surface.
Okay, and you noticed some of those on the neck area as well, is that correct?
There were multiple of those on both the neck and the wrists.
This portion of the testimony is especially significant because the doctor is carefully distinguishing between what he can medically observe and what he cannot determine about a person's intent. He describes multiple superficial injuries as well as full-thickness lacerations, including injuries to both wrists. He also explains the concept of hesitation wounds, which are generally more superficial injuries that can occur alongside more serious wounds. But notice what happened when the attorney tried to get the doctor to characterize the injuries as either genuine or fake. The judge sustained the objection. That's a crucial courtroom moment. A medical expert can describe the physical findings and explain whether injuries are consistent with certain patterns of trauma, but that does not automatically give the expert authority to determine someone's state of mind or ultimate intent. The doctor himself made that distinction when he testified that the injuries were consistent with self-injurious behavior, while saying he could not gauge the intent. That limitation matters. The jury is ultimately responsible for weighing the evidence and deciding what conclusions, if any, should be drawn from it.
As it relates to the injuries to the wrists, did you observe any vascular structures or penetration of the cervical, the fascia?
There was not.
Okay. What other injuries did you recall from reviewing the medical records?
So she also had multiple fractures in her cervical spine, which are the vertebrae that make up her neck, including what's called a burst fracture of C1, and then other fractures of C4. She also had fractures of multiple levels of the thoracic spine. I believe she had multiple transverse process fractures on both the right and left.
What does that mean, transverse fractures?
Transverse processes are lateral projections, basically projections that go sideways off of the bone that allow the ribs to articulate, connect with the spine, and they also allow muscles to connect, and they help support the basically overall ring structure of the spinal canal.
And was she then transported by med flight or life flight to a Boston hospital?
She was.
What does that tell you as an emergency surgeon when someone's transported by med flight or life flight?
Typically means that her injuries are felt to be severe enough that she needs immediate intervention and further treatment, that the hospital that is basically necessitating the transport is saying that they cannot provide at their facility.
She was then transported to what hospital?
Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston.
She was admitted to what unit?
Surgical ICU.
And you had a chance to review all those medical records as well?
I did.
Did she suffer a particular event that night that you recall from looking at the records?
She did shortly after arriving in the surgical ICU. It sounds like they were moving her, and when they moved her, they noticed that her blood pressure dropped, her pulse became faint, and subsequently she actually suffered a complete cardiac arrest and required 2 rounds of cardiopulmonary resuscitation with compressions and medications before she was able to be revived.
And she also, to your knowledge, had suffered significant hemorrhage and had to have a fairly massive blood transfusion?
Yes, they placed chest tubes, which are basically plastic tubes that go into the chest cavity on both sides, and had about 300 cc's of blood come out from each side, and there was also noted to be significant hemorrhage around the spine and into the mediastinum, which is the portion of the chest that houses a lot of the organs like your esophagus, your trachea, blood vessels, that kind of thing.
Now, if there's a fracture, a serious fracture to, I believe it's C1, does that interfere possibly with a person's ability to breathe?
It does.
And how does that work?
So if you have a fracture that affects the spinal cord above a certain level, typically above the 3rd cervical vertebrae, it basically removes your ability to initiate breathing on your own. Your 3rd, 4th, and 5th cervical vertebrae, the nerves that lead from there, are the ones that are responsible for telling your diaphragm to go up and down and help you breathe. And so if you lose the ability to send that signal down to your diaphragm, you lose the ability to breathe.
Now, as it relates to your review of the medical records and review of the history, are you aware of the mechanism of the injuries that she suffered that you just described for the jury?
I am.
Tell us what that was, to your knowledge.
That she went out of her second-story window.
And going out of the window, obviously, did she strike the ground, or?
She did.
And that caused the injuries, the mechanism of injury?
Yes, it's consistent with all of her injuries.
Now, with
At
your
this
experience...
point, the testimony has moved from individual injuries to the bigger medical picture. The doctor has described fractures involving the cervical and thoracic spine, including a C1 burst fracture, and explained why serious injuries in the upper cervical spine can potentially interfere with a person's ability to breathe. He also testified about what happened after the patient arrived at the surgical ICU. A significant drop in blood pressure, a faint pulse, cardiac arrest, CPR, chest tubes, blood in the chest, and substantial hemorrhage. Then comes a critical piece of testimony, the mechanism of injury. According to the records reviewed by the doctor, she went out of a second-story window, struck the ground, and the doctor testified that this mechanism was consistent with the injuries described. That doesn't mean every legal question has been answered. Medical consistency is one part of the evidence, while the jury must consider the complete record and all competing evidence presented in court. And notice what happens immediately afterward. The attorney tries to ask the doctor for an opinion about the combined effect of the injuries, but the question draws an objection and is ultimately withdrawn. Once again, the courtroom is drawing a line between what the expert has established medically and what the attorney is trying to have him conclude.
Now, with your experience, sir, with, as you indicated, dealing with people in the emergency room and treating people that have been involved with sequential acts of self-harm, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as an emergency board-certified physician as to the effect of the combination of the multiple sequential injuries that you saw?
Objection.
Can I see counsel at sidebar? Just
I can withdraw it, Judge. I'll withdraw it. Just thank you very much.
No questions.
all right. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
And that brings this portion of the medical testimony to a close. The doctor provided the jury with a detailed medical roadmap. The patient initially arrived in critical condition, required airway support and intensive treatment, had severe hypothermia and unstable vital signs, sustained multiple lacerations and serious spinal fractures, was transferred to a higher-level trauma center, and later suffered cardiac arrest and significant hemorrhage. Most importantly, the doctor testified that the injuries were consistent with the reported mechanism of falling from a second-story window. At the same time, he was careful about the limits of his expertise. He could describe the injuries and their medical significance, but he could not simply declare the patient's intent based on those injuries alone. The judge also demonstrated how courtroom procedure controls the testimony, sustaining an objection when an improper or unsupported conclusion was sought, and allowing the attorney to withdraw the question. That distinction between evidence, expert interpretation, and ultimate legal conclusions is something every viewer should keep in mind when evaluating courtroom testimony. So now the question goes to you. Based strictly on the evidence presented here, what do you think the medical testimony proves? And what questions do you think still remain unanswered? If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping courtroom breakdowns.